You may be misreading the most important changes in your life. You have been calling them confusion, loss of motivation, distance, restlessness, or even failure. You look at the life you once knew how to live, and you wonder why you can no longer enter it with the same conviction. The goals that used to animate you feel strangely hollow. The conversations that once held you now leave you tired. The identity you worked so hard to build no longer feels like shelter. It feels like a room with no air. Carl Jung spent decades studying exactly this moment. He saw that the approach to a more authentic life rarely feels like arrival. At first, it feels like disorientation. The conscious personality loses its old coordinates before the deeper personality reveals a new direction. What you experience as being lost may actually be the psyche withdrawing its loyalty from a path that was never fully yours. This does not mean every painful season is secretly a spiritual promotion. It does not mean uncertainty should be romanticized or that every impulse deserves to be followed. It means something more demanding. Your symptoms may contain information. Your fatigue may have an object. Your resistance may be precise. And the life that appears to be falling apart may be exposing the terms under which it was held together. You probably expected your real path to announce itself through certainty. You imagined a clear calling, a decisive moment, a clean break between the false life and the true one. But the psyche does not usually speak in slogans. It speaks through lost energy, recurring images, disproportionate reactions, unwanted truths, and attractions you cannot explain away. It does not hand you a map. It interrupts the route you were already taking. That interruption can feel humiliating because it removes the evidence you used to prove that you were doing well. You may become less efficient at pursuing what no longer matters. You may stop being able to tolerate relationships built on your self-abandonment. You may disappoint people who benefited from your predictability. You may feel less certain at the exact moment you are becoming more honest. The paradox is that your distance from the old life can make you believe you are farther from your real one. You see the gap, but not the movement. You feel the absence of direction, but not the end of obedience. You notice that your old ambitions no longer work, but you do not yet recognize that their failure may be evidence of psychological development. Jung called the larger movement individuation. It is the lifelong process through which you become less divided against yourself and more capable of living from the totality of who you are. Individuation is not self-improvement in the ordinary sense. It does not polish the social personality until everyone approves of it. It brings the conscious ego into relationship with parts of the psyche that were ignored, rejected, projected, or never allowed to develop. Your persona stands at the center of this conflict. Jung used that word for the social face you build in response to family, culture, work, and expectation. The persona is necessary. It helps you participate in the world. But when you mistake that face for your whole identity, success becomes a form of captivity. You can perform your life beautifully while becoming increasingly absent from it. The first disturbance often appears when the persona stops receiving energy from the deeper psyche. What once felt meaningful begins to feel mechanical. Praise gives you a shorter and shorter lift. Achievement produces relief rather than satisfaction. You complete the task, receive the approval, and almost immediately feel the same vacancy waiting beneath it. A woman finishes a presentation she spent 2 weeks perfecting. Her manager congratulates her, and the room nods. She smiles, closes her laptop, and reaches for her phone before anyone can speak to her privately. In the elevator, she sees her reflection in the dark screen and feels no pride, only the urgent wish to go somewhere no one knows her name. The danger is not simply that you might remain unhappy. The deeper danger is that you might become highly skilled at betraying yourself. You can learn to override every signal, explain away every resistance, and convert every inner protest into another productivity problem. Eventually, you no longer know what you want. You only know what will keep the structure intact. That is why the path toward yourself so often begins as a disruption of adaptation. The personality that helped you belong cannot always help you become. The strategies that protected you in one phase of life can prevent you from entering the next. Your task is not to destroy the persona, but to stop asking it to answer questions it was never built to answer. Several signs begin to appear when this process is underway. They are easy to misunderstand because none of them looks impressive from the outside. Each one can resemble regression. Yet together, they reveal that the center of gravity in your life is beginning to move. What once impressed you no longer has the power to organize your life. This is more than boredom. Boredom passes when stimulation changes. What you are experiencing is a withdrawal of projection. Jung showed that the psyche often places its unlived qualities onto people, institutions, ambitions, and symbols in the outer world. You do not merely want the promotion, the partner, the status, or the admired identity. You imagine that it contains a missing part of you. It seems luminous because your own psychic energy is shining through it. When that projection begins to withdraw, the object loses its glow. You may still understand why other people want it. You may still be capable of obtaining it, but it no longer promises salvation. This can feel frightening, because desire gave your days structure. Even an inauthentic ambition can supply momentum. When its enchantment breaks, you are left with energy that has not yet found a new form. A man opens the website of a company he once dreamed of joining. He scrolls through the photographs of glass offices, smiling teams, and carefully worded values. A year earlier, he would have imagined himself in every image. Now he closes the tab, rests his hand on the mouse, and realizes that he does not envy anyone pictured there. The loss of fascination is not always cynicism. Sometimes it is the return of psychic energy from an image that can no longer carry your future. You may notice this withdrawal in small, almost embarrassing ways. A title you wanted sounds theatrical when spoken aloud. A lifestyle you once admired begins to look exhausting. A person whose approval governed you suddenly seems human, limited, and unable to confer the worth you assign to them. You do not necessarily hate these things. You simply stop kneeling before them. This change can make you fear that you have become ungrateful or impossible to satisfy. People around you may reinforce that fear. They remember how badly you wanted what you now question. They may tell you to appreciate what you have, stay the course, or recover your old hunger. Their confusion is understandable. They saw the consistency of your pursuit, but they did not see how much of it was driven by a need to become acceptable. Jung understood that projection is not a mistake to be ashamed of. It is one of the ways unconscious potential first becomes visible. You often encounter a quality outside yourself before you can recognize it within yourself. You admire courage in another person because your own courage has not yet become conscious. You worship freedom in a certain life because your own capacity for freedom remains unused. The problem begins only when you believe the outer carrier owns what your psyche is showing you. As the projection returns, you face a subtler question. What did the object symbolize? Perhaps the career represented authority, and what you actually need is permission to direct your own life. Perhaps the relationship represented tenderness, and what you need is to stop treating your sensitivity as weakness. Perhaps wealth represented safety, and what you need is a more honest relationship with dependence, fear, and control. You are closer to your path when the symbol can no longer substitute for the quality. The disappointment hurts because you are being asked to reclaim the life you outsourced to it. Your discomfort has become more specific. At an earlier stage, you may have felt generally dissatisfied. Everything seemed wrong, so nothing could be addressed. You blamed your mood, your circumstances, the world, or your lack of discipline. But as the unconscious approaches consciousness, the pain acquires definition. You begin to notice exactly which conversations make you disappear. You feel the moment your voice changes to secure approval. You recognize the bodily tension that arrives before you agree to something you do not want. Jung treated symptoms as meaningful formations, not random defects to be silenced as quickly as possible. A symptom can express a conflict the conscious mind refuses to admit. This does not make suffering desirable, and it does not replace medical or psychological care. It means that care becomes deeper when you ask not only how to remove the discomfort, but what opposition the discomfort is revealing. Specific discomfort marks progress, because vague suffering preserves vague solutions. If you only know that your life feels wrong, you can chase endless changes. A new routine, a new city, a new partner, a new philosophy. But when you know that you become exhausted after performing cheerfulness around a certain person, the psyche has given you a precise piece of truth. When you know that your anxiety spikes each time you hide your actual opinion, the conflict is no longer abstract. A young man sits in his parked car outside his parents' house. His hand is on the door handle, but he does not move. He rehearses the version of himself he will become inside, agreeable, amused, and careful not to mention the decision he has made. For the first time, he notices that the heaviness begins before the door opens, not after the conversation starts. What you are calling oversensitivity may be your growing ability to detect the exact instant you abandon your own experience. This specificity often appears first in the body. Your jaw tightens around a sentence you do not say. Your stomach contracts when someone assigns you a role you have outgrown. Your shoulders rise when you hear a familiar tone of expectation. The body is not infallible, but it frequently registers contradiction before the ego can explain it. It knows when your spoken yes contains an unspoken no. The conscious personality prefers general explanations because they do not demand a decision. If you are simply tired, you can rest and resume the same pattern. If you are simply unmotivated, you can force yourself harder. If everyone is difficult, you never have to examine the particular relationship in which you keep surrendering your boundaries. Precision removes these exits. This is one reason increased awareness can initially make life feel worse. You once moved through certain situations by going numb. Now you feel each compromise as it happens. You may think you were stronger before, when you could tolerate more. But tolerance is not always strength. Sometimes it is dissociation made socially useful. Jung's approach asks you to hold the tension between adaptation and truth. You cannot obey every feeling, and you cannot dismiss every feeling. You have to develop the capacity to stay with discomfort long enough to distinguish fear of growth from the pain of self-betrayal. One contracts around possibility, the other drains meaning from your life. They can feel similar at first, but they leave different traces. Fear of growth often contains energy. Beneath the anxiety, something in you leans forward. The task frightens you, but it also makes you more awake. Self-betrayal has a flatter quality. You may perform well, but inwardly you recede. Afterward, you do not feel stretched. You feel erased. You are closer to your real path when you can no longer call every form of pain the same thing. Your psyche is teaching you its vocabulary, and each precise sensation makes unconscious obedience harder to maintain. You are becoming less willing to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. This can look like withdrawal, coldness, or a failure of communication. Sometimes it is those things. Silence can be punitive. Distance can be avoidance. But there is another kind of silence that appears when you recognize that explanation has become a ritual of self-abandonment. You are not sharing yourself to create understanding. You are presenting evidence to a tribunal that has already reached its verdict. Jung saw that individuation requires a differentiation from the collective. The collective is not only society at large. It lives in the intimate expectations that tell you who you must be to remain lovable. Every family, friendship, profession, and community carries an image of acceptable personhood. To belong, you develop a version of yourself that fits the image. To individuate, you eventually have to discover where belonging has required falsification. This does not mean becoming oppositional for its own sake. Rebellion can be another form of dependence, because your life remains organized around what you reject. Genuine differentiation is quieter. You stop needing the other person to agree before your experience becomes real. You listen to criticism without automatically converting it into a command. You allow someone to hold an incomplete picture of you. A woman types a long message after a friend calls her selfish for declining an invitation. She explains her workload, her exhaustion, and the difficult week she has had. Before sending it, she reads the message twice. Then she deletes every sentence and writes, "I will not be there, but I hope the evening goes well." She places the phone face down and sits with the guilt instead of negotiating against herself. What you are calling distance may be the first boundary that does not require the other person's permission to exist. The guilt can be intense because the old bond may have depended on your explainability. As long as every choice could be justified in terms the other person accepted, your autonomy remained conditional. You were free only when your freedom made sense to them. The moment you stop persuading, you confront the possibility that they may prefer the compliant version of you. Jung described the shadow as the part of the personality the conscious identity refuses to recognize. If you built your identity around being kind, easy, loyal, and understanding, the shadow may contain anger, refusal, selfishness, ambition, and the power to disappoint. These qualities do not become ethical merely because they were repressed, but they do not become evil merely because others dislike them. They need conscious relationship. Your refusal may contain cruelty, or it may contain self-respect. Your anger may seek domination, or it may identify a violated boundary. Your wish to leave may be impulsive escape, or it may be the end of a long internal negotiation. Shadow work asks more of you than suppression, and more of you than expression. It asks you to examine the energy, take responsibility for it, and choose its form. When you stop over-explaining, you recover energy previously spent managing other people's reactions. That recovery can feel selfish because you were trained to experience their comfort as evidence of your goodness. Yet a life organized around preventing disappointment cannot become your own. It can only become more sophisticated in its obedience. You may lose the image of yourself as universally reasonable. Someone may call you difficult. Someone may repeat a version of events in which your boundary appears unkind. The old part of you will want to rush back into the courtroom and defend your character. The emerging part understands that being known accurately by everyone is an impossible condition for living truthfully. You are closer to your path when misunderstanding no longer automatically pulls you away from yourself. The ache remains, but it stops functioning as a leash. Your envy is becoming informative rather than shameful. Envy is one of the feelings the persona most urgently conceals. It threatens the image of being generous, content, and morally composed. So you may disguise it as criticism. You find flaws in the person whose freedom unsettles you. You question the seriousness of their work, the stability of their choices, or the purity of their motives. You reduce what disturbs you because admitting desire would require you to confront your own unused life. Jung's psychology turns envy into a question of projection. The person who provokes you may be carrying a quality your conscious identity has forbidden. Their visibility irritates you because you learn to remain hidden. Their decisiveness seems arrogant because you survive through hesitation. Their creative life appears indulgent because you built your worth around usefulness. This does not mean every envied life is right for you. You may envy an image, not the reality beneath it. You may want the applause and not the labor, the freedom and not the responsibility, the intimacy and not the vulnerability. Psychological honesty requires you to separate symbol from fact. But dismissing envy entirely wastes valuable information. A man watches a short video of someone working alone in a small studio. There is no luxury in the room, only a desk, a lamp, and shelves filled with half-finished projects. He feels an immediate urge to mock the person's earnestness. Then he pauses the video and notices that he has been staring at the closed door behind the desk, imagining what it would feel like to have a room where no one interrupts him. What you are calling jealousy may be grief for a permission you keep waiting for someone else to grant. Envy becomes useful when you stop making it a verdict on your character and start treating it as a distorted message. Ask what quality carries the charge. Is it independence, embodiment, courage, discipline, play, intellectual seriousness, sensuality, privacy, or the willingness to take up space? The answer may embarrass you because it often contradicts the role you have performed. The endlessly capable person may envy someone who receives care. The agreeable person may envy bluntness. The responsible person may envy spontaneity. The invisible person may envy attention while claiming to despise it. In each case, the psyche points toward a capacity excluded from the conscious personality. Marie-Louise von Franz, who worked closely with Jung, repeatedly explored how unconscious contents first appear in projected or symbolic form. What grips you outside may be asking for an inner response. You do not need to copy the person who activates you. You need to examine the unlived possibility their image has exposed. This is difficult because reclaiming the projected quality changes your obligations. If you admit that you want privacy, you may need to disappoint those who expect constant access. If you admit that you want creative work, you may have to face being a beginner. If you admit that you want recognition, you must risk being seen and judged. Envy protected you from these costs by keeping desire attached to someone else. The movement toward your real path begins when the energy of comparison becomes the energy of participation. You stop asking why they are allowed to live that way and start asking what small part of your own life is demanding embodiment. The answer will not flatter you. It will implicate you. You are closer to your path when another person's life no longer functions only as evidence against yours. It becomes a mirror for what your own personality has refused to authorize. The same themes keep returning, even after you change the scenery. You may have tried to leave the conflict behind. You changed jobs, relationships, routines, cities, or communities. For a while, the relief felt like transformation. Then, the pattern returned in a different costume. Another authority figure made you feel small. Another relationship required you to perform rescue. Another opportunity collapsed at the moment visibility became unavoidable. Another season of overwork ended in the same numb exhaustion. Repetition is not proof that you are doomed. It is evidence that the psyche is persistent. Jung observed that what remains unconscious tends to appear in life as fate. The phrase is often simplified into the idea that thoughts magically create events. His psychological point was more exacting. Unrecognized complexes influence what you notice, whom you trust, how you interpret ambiguity, what treatment you accept, and which actions feel available. You participate in the pattern without consciously choosing it, then experience the result as something that merely happened to you. A woman begins a new role with a promise that she will not overextend herself. During the first week, she answers a late message to be helpful. A month later, she is correcting other people's work after dinner. One night, her hand reaches toward the glowing phone on the table, then stops. She recognizes the exact mixture of resentment and pride that governed her previous job. What you are calling another setback may be the moment the pattern becomes visible early enough for you to choose differently. This is a major shift. At first, you recognize a pattern only after it has completed itself. You leave the relationship and understand years later why you stayed. You collapse from overwork and only then see how praise kept you from setting limits. You repeat the same conflict and call it bad luck. Consciousness arrives after the damage. Then recognition moves closer to the event. You see the pattern while it is unfolding. You hear yourself give the familiar answer. You feel the old attraction. You notice the instant you convert fear into contempt or need into control. You may still enact the pattern, but you can no longer do so innocently. Eventually, awareness arrives at the threshold. Your hand pauses before sending the message. Your mouth closes before offering the automatic yes. You notice that the charismatic stranger produces the same intensity as someone who once harmed you. You recognize that the exciting opportunity requires the exact form of self-neglect. You promise to stop calling ambition. This stage can feel worse because you now witness your own participation. Unconscious repetition allowed you to feel purely acted upon. Consciousness introduces responsibility, and responsibility can awaken shame. But shame is not the goal. The purpose of recognition is choice. You cannot change what you refuse to see, and you cannot sustainably change what you only attack in yourself. Jung's concept of the complex helps explain why insight alone is not enough. A complex is an emotionally charged cluster of memories, beliefs, images, and bodily responses organized around a theme. When activated, it can temporarily behave like a separate personality. You may understand your pattern clearly in the morning and still obey it by evening because the complex captures your perception from within. This is why recurring themes require patience, observation, and sometimes professional support. You are not merely correcting an opinion. You are building a relationship, with a part of the psyche formed under conditions that once made its strategy necessary. The pleaser may have protected attachment. The controller may have protected against chaos. The performer may have secured recognition in a home where simple presence was ignored. Integration does not mean allowing these parts to run your life. It means hearing what they protect, recognizing when their strategy is obsolete, and developing a conscious response that can bear the feelings they once managed automatically. You are closer to your real path when repetition stops looking like meaningless punishment and begins to reveal the precise place where freedom must be practiced. These signs do not guarantee that you know what to do next. They reveal something more modest and more consequential. The false directions are losing authority. Your psyche is becoming less willing to finance a life built entirely on adaptation. You may not possess a new map, but the old map has stopped pretending to be neutral. Now comes the truth you may want to avoid. Your real path will not only cost you what is false, it may cost you things that are genuinely good. This is where romantic language about authenticity becomes dangerous. It suggests that once you choose yourself, every loss will prove that the lost thing was unworthy. But some relationships are loving and still cannot accompany your development. Some roles are honorable and still require too much of your unlived life. Some forms of security are real, not illusions, and leaving them exposes you to actual uncertainty. Individuation does not sort the world into villains and allies. It asks whether your outer life can bear your inner truth. Sometimes the answer requires negotiation. Sometimes it requires patience. Sometimes it requires staying and changing your participation. And sometimes it requires an ending no one involved fully deserves. You may want a path that preserves every attachment, every reputation, every option, and every version of yourself. That path does not exist. Every meaningful commitment closes other possibilities. To become particular is to stop remaining available for every imagined life. You cannot indefinitely protect the identity of the dutiful child, the admired professional, the endlessly available friend, the safe partner, the invisible artist, and the emerging self who needs room to breathe. At some point, these claims collide. Jung understood that psychological development involves sacrifice, not punishment, and not theatrical suffering. Sacrifice means making something sacred by giving up the claim to possess every alternative. The ego wants transformation without loss. The psyche demands an exchange. The shadow beneath your search for a real path may be your wish to avoid guilt. You want to become yourself without anyone feeling abandoned. You want to set limits without anyone calling you selfish. You want to speak honestly without changing the relationship. You want to leave the role while keeping all the love that was attached to your performance of it. But some people do not merely love you. They love the arrangement you maintain. They love your availability, your silence, your admiration, your predictability, or your willingness to absorb what they refuse to carry. When the arrangement changes, their distress may be real. Your growth can injure expectations even when it does not violate your values. You will have to learn the difference between causing pain and doing harm. Honest change can cause pain. A boundary can disappoint. A refusal can expose another person's dependence. An ending can create grief. If you treat every painful reaction as proof that you have done harm, you will remain governed by the most distressed person in the room. This does not absolve you from care. Your authenticity does not make you innocent. You can pursue a true need in a careless way. You can use individuation to justify avoidance, superiority, or broken promises. You can call impulsivity intuition and contempt discernment. The path asks you to accept responsibility for your manner without abandoning responsibility for your life. There is another cost. You may lose the fantasy that one perfect decision will finally remove uncertainty. Your real path is not a hidden track on which every event becomes effortless. It is a relationship with your own depths. That relationship continues to question you. What fits now may become too small later. What feels meaningful may still require tedious labor. What is yours may still frighten you. You may also discover that your deepest obstacle is not external permission, but your own attachment to innocence. If others prevent you, you remain blameless, and potential stays pure. Once you choose, your work can fail. Your voice can be criticized. Your desire can prove more complicated than you imagined. The unlived life is perfect because reality has never touched it. This is why some people remain forever at the threshold of authenticity. They become experts in signs, dreams, wounds, and explanations, but never allow insight to acquire consequence. They keep the real path as a beautiful inner possibility. It consoles them while demanding nothing. The persona continues to run daily life, and the soul becomes a private story told after dark. The signs only matter if they alter your relationship with choice. You do not need to make a dramatic announcement. You do not need to burn down your existing life to prove that you heard the unconscious. Grand gestures can be a defense against the slower work of integration. But something must become different. A truth must enter a conversation. A limit must survive another person's disappointment. A recurring pattern must meet a response it has not met before. An unlived quality must receive a place in time, not only in imagination. The cost is specificity. You have to stop loving your path as an idea and meet it as a set of exclusions. This work, not every work. This relationship, in this form. Not every possible bond. This value when it conflicts with approval. This honest limit when the old identity calls it failure. You may grieve the person you could have remained. That person kept more doors open. That person knew how to earn familiar love. That person could enter old rooms without disturbing the furniture. Becoming does not require contempt for that identity. It requires gratitude for how it protected you, and recognition that protection has become confinement. You are allowed to stop demanding certainty before you honor what has become clear. You are allowed to stop forcing enthusiasm for goals whose symbolic work is finished. You do not need to hate them, ridicule your former self, or prove that they were always meaningless. They carried you to the point where you could see beyond them. Letting them lose their authority is not ingratitude. You are allowed to trust the precision of your discomfort without turning every feeling into an order. You can listen slowly. You can test what you perceive against reality. You can seek therapy, wise counsel, and honest conversation without handing someone else the authorship of your life. You are allowed to let a boundary remain true, even when your explanation fails to produce approval. You can care about another person's pain without returning automatically to the role that prevented it. Compassion does not require self-erasure. You are allowed to examine envy without shame and desire without worship. What attracts you does not have to become your identity. It can reveal a capacity that needs a modest, concrete place in your life. You are allowed to meet repetition with curiosity instead of humiliation. Seeing the pattern again does not mean you learned nothing. Sometimes it means you are seeing it earlier. Sometimes the moment your hand pauses is the entire beginning of freedom. You are allowed to take your inner life seriously without pretending it makes you special. Dreams, images, intuitions, and recurring longings can enter the conversation. They do not have to control it. Your conscious judgment and your unconscious depths can learn to share the same table. Most of all, you are allowed to be between identities. The space after the old direction loses meaning, and before the new direction becomes visible, is not empty in the way you fear. It is psychologically active. Old projections are returning. Repressed qualities are asking for recognition. The persona is loosening. A more truthful center is forming through tensions you cannot resolve by returning to who you were. This middle space can look unproductive from the outside. You may have fewer impressive answers. You may speak more carefully. You may withdraw from noise, question automatic loyalties, and protect time you cannot yet justify. None of this proves that you are right, but it may prove that you are finally listening. The accusation at the beginning was that you have mistaken movement for failure. Now you can see why. You measured progress by certainty, energy, praise, and visible momentum. The psyche measured it by how much falseness you could no longer perform without feeling the cost. Your real path may be closer than you think, because it is no longer merely ahead of you. It is already present in what has lost its glamour, in what your body can no longer ignore, in the explanations you no longer offer, in the envy you are learning to read, and in the patterns you can finally see. You are not waiting for the path to appear. You are learning to recognize the part of you that has already begun walking away from what is not yours. If this resonates, subscribe to The Waking Shadow, where you explore Jung's psychology for the individuation path. Watch the video on your screen now to understand what happens when your old identity can no longer contain the person you are becoming.